Ooh. Okay, right, this is gonna be interesting. So today, I'll be ranking all 15 non-fiction books that I've read in 2021. Now, I'm not operating under any criteria or whatsoever. I'm literally just gonna be instinctive and rank them based on how I feel about them, my first impressions, and what I remember about. I usually read a lot more non-fictions compared to fiction books, right? So last year I read 15 non-fiction books, probably three to four fiction books, and I've been reading 10 plus books for 3 years now. So a lot of big popular books I've already read, but of course there's also quite a few that I haven't read, as you can see on the list. So I guess let's just start from the first one: 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Now if you're big into non-fiction books, you'll probably know the author. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Yuval Noah Harari, I think that's how you pronounce his name. But if you don't know, he's the author of Sapiens. Now Sapiens is this really popular books a few years ago. I think it still is, but maybe a lot of people have read it already. But Sapiens is basically about how did we come to become the humankind that we are, basically the evolution of human, the agricultural revolution, blah blah blah. This is his second or third book, can't remember, basically talking about, as the title says, 21 lessons for the 21st century. And I actually really like this one because I like Sapiens a lot, but I think I might even like this a bit more because he basically broke down a lot of the more contemporary and modern issues that we face in modern society. For example, immigration, the climate issue, terrorism, tech and AI taking over jobs, etc. Broken them down into 21 easily digestible chapters, and sort of gave both sides of the coins and what he thinks about the issue. And I think it gives you a really good framework on how to understand the world. And so this one is definitely, in my opinion, S tier. Okay, so the second book today is Chinese Literature, a very short introduction. So I don't know who the author is, but this book is part of a series by Oxford University Press. Basically a series of a lot of very short introductory books about different topics. Each of them is this thin, it's 150 page max. And yeah, like I said, it's basically a very short introduction of a book, and this one happens to be about Chinese literature. I think I actually read this in Chinese because I thought, coming from my background, I'm from Hong Kong, I really wanted to learn more about my culture and the old way of writing, the literature. I had to say it was very boring. Not because of the content, right? Chinese literature itself can be interesting, but the way that they write about Chinese literature is really descriptive. I don't think this is the problem with this specific book. I think it's a problem with the whole series, because I remember 2-3 years ago, I was really into politics, and I picked up a very short introduction of socialism. I think it was the same series, and it was also very dry, very descriptive. There was not much analytical criticism in it, so I didn't really like this. So I'll have to say this one, D tier. I'm sorry, I probably don't even remember a single thing about the book. So yeah, D tier. Okay, next one, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Now this one basically talks about how a social phenomenon can become a viral phenomenon. So for example, how does Squid Game becomes viral, and how does a certain fashion item suddenly take over the world. So Malcolm Gladwell is this Canadian author slash journalist who used to write for the New Yorkers. He wrote quite a few books about how successful people become successful, stuff like that. Now I read this over the summer. I think I liked it, but I don't think it was too persuasive, because it felt a lot like those pop psychology book that you read, the ones that markets and brands itself like a psychology book, but then sounds a bit contradictory at times, and it's not really backed by a lot of scientific research and stuff. But I did enjoy the read, so I'll say this one is a B tier. Okay, next up is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. So if you don't know Phil, don't worry, I don't personally know Phil either, because he's the founder of Nike. and I would love to meet him. So Phil, if you're watching, yeah, give me a text. But anyway, this is his memoir about how he founded Nike and basically like made it into the $1 million company that it is today. I really enjoyed the read. Again, it's very motivational, but I think it was more motivational and like sort of a bedtime, not a bedtime read, because like if you read it before you sleep, you probably cannot sleep. You probably want to go out, like have a run with your Nike trainers. But I did really enjoy this book. It really showed like what it takes to create and run a very, very big successful businesses and all the sacrifice you need to take. So I remember him talking about like how he was working full-time in audit, I think, or as an accountant in PwC actually, while starting his Nike business at the time. And that really shows you like the hustle mentality that he adopted. And I recommend it to you if you really enjoy business read, etc. I'll say this is an A-tier book. Yep. Okay, next up, Smart People Should Build Things by Andrew Yang. Now, Andrew Yang, he basically ran for US president a few years ago for the Democratic Party, but then he didn't win. And then I think last year or this year, he ran for the New York mayor. So I think he's this really progressive guy. One of the main policy that he's like advocating for is universal basic income. So that gives you a sense of what kind of person he is. Now, in this book, it basically talks about what it says on the titles. He argues that smart people should build things. So what he meant is that top graduates from Ivy League, or like if you're in the UK, like if you're in like the top 10 unis, etc., like he argues that these people should go to positions where they can actually build and create things. So sort of like startup, rather than go into big traditional routes like becoming a lawyer, becoming a consultant, and investment banker, etc. The whole book is basically him putting forward his case and arguing for it. I think I'm quite convinced in what he says, but I think this is more written for sort of like the policymaker, and instead of like me, who's actually a undergrad. And although I agree with a lot of his points on why it's better for the society if more people goes into startup, etc., he also rightly points out the risk and sort of like the drawbacks of why so many young people wanted to go into startup but have not yet done so. I guess I'm one of the college university graduate that he's talking about who's like going into consulting instead of startup, where he should be. Anyway, I really enjoyed the read. I think this is between an A and a B. It's definitely better than Tipping Point, but not as good as Shoe Dog. So this is hard. I'll say it's a B because a lot of good stuff is coming up, so I'll have to leave some space for those books. Okay, next one, 0 to 1, written by Peter Thiel. Thiel? Yeah, I think Thiel. Oops, sorry. So if you don't know, Peter Thiel is again this like legendary figure in Silicon Valley. He's one of the founders of PayPal, part of the infamous or famous PayPal mafia, as they called it. And he's also the founder of Palantir, which is like how do you describe it?
2 hours later.
Basically like a big company as well. And he's the first outside investor of Facebook. So he's like this very famous legendary figure in the startup world. I really like this book because it's really thin. It's like this thin. And I don't know how many pages that equates to, but probably around 200. But he's able to fill in so much information within so little word count. He was really concise in what he says, and it brings out a very strong point each time in each chapter. I really like the book as well because he was very controversial in a lot of his points. He basically dissed on a lot of like famous and popular startup advice. For example, one of the big advice he gave in the book is to escape competition. And that sounds really controversial, right? Because like your whole life you've been told, oh, if you want to win, you have to compete for the best. But he actually argues against it. He said the best way to really stand out is to escape competition and sort of like create a own category for your startup, etc. So I really like this book as well. If you're into startup, definitely read this. It's only gonna take you like a week, but like one of the best books this year that I've read. Straight into S tier. The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. Now, Naval Ravikant, who is Naval Ravikant? He is, again, this like really famous figure in Silicon Valley sort of like tech world, and he's the founder and former CEO of AngelList. So AngelList is like this website where you look for startup jobs, similar sort of like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, etc. And Naval is sort of like the tech guy who's also very like philosophical and very zen. And so the book is basically talking about how to, I think it's broken into two parts. So the first part talks about how to get rich. Second part talks about how to be happy. But this isn't the typical self-help or like money guru book that you read. If you've watched an interview done by him, you'll actually, you can hear his voice speaking while you're reading the book, which is really nice. If you want to taste of the book, I recommend you to go on YouTube, literally just like search up his name, search up Naval. There'll be tons of YouTube videos on there. I personally really like the podcast episode he did with Joe Rogan. That was probably like one of the top podcast episodes I've ever heard. If you have the time, like literally spend like an hour or two just to listen to it. It really is life-changing. The book basically talks about a lot of the stuff that he preaches for, and I think this is again one of the best books that I've read this year. Again, straight into the S tier. Next one, Happy Sexy Millionaire by Stephen Bartlett. If you're from outside of the UK, maybe don't know who Stephen Bartlett is, but if you're in the UK, then you probably know him. He's again this really like famous, not really famous, but like kind of famous entrepreneur slash influencer. He's recently became like one of the dens in Dragon's Den in the UK. Now, if you're from the States, Dragon's Den is basically Shark Tank. He's one of the judge basically, and again this book talks about how he found his like happiness and how he realized how to become successful, etc. Very similar to the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and indeed like in the book he attributes a lot of his success and a lot of like his philosophy in life to Naval. I actually read this after the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and I can see the similarities, but this is sort of like less serious. This is sort of like more for younger guys, I'll say. Like if you're in your teens or if you're in your early 20s, like the tone that he uses, the wording he uses is a lot more entertaining. I'll say between an A or S tier, but again a very, very good read. I'll say the A tier simply because I know that a lot of his ideas are not original and a lot of it is from Naval, and the Naval book is just a bit more wiser. So yeah, A tier I'll say. Next book, Thankfulness by, I forgot the author's name. But this is an amazing book again. I actually picked it up because firstly, Bill Gates recommended it. I know Bill Gates recommend like a lot of books, but this one also had like an amazing Goodreads rating. I'm talking about like 4.6 or something, which is like crazy. So I picked it up and finished it, I think within 2 weeks actually. A very, very good read, similar to 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. So it gives you a lot of mental models and sort of frameworks on how to understand the world, how to interpret different data, interpret different media or different information that you've absorbed. Again, I love this book, like to give you a sense of what it is about. In one of the chapters, it talks about why we should stop categorizing countries into the developing world and the developed world. He talked about how this model has been used for the past like 100 years and so on, and how this really doesn't apply to the modern world that we live in right now. He talks about how I think 70 or 80% of the population in the world today actually lives in mid-level income countries, and there really isn't a gap anymore in terms of the developing and the developed world. So that insight like that is really helpful in helping me understand sort of like what the world is today and how we really should understand it and how we should change our actions accordingly. And again, this one I believe is a good book, whoever you are. Like, this is very interesting. It's not a dense book, again, like this thick. I don't know, man, I can't remember like how many pages they have, but like I know it's like this thick. So probably like between 200 to 300. Again, like not a hard read at all. They have like graphs and stuff, and it's really enjoyable. S tier. Okay, next one. Ooh, this is interesting. Jordan B. Peterson, Beyond Order. Okay, so if you know Jordan Peterson, then I don't have to explain, but if you don't, he's this really controversial clinical psychologist who is famous for, firstly, his political stance, and second of all, his sort of self-improvement stuff that he preaches for. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of his political stance, but I really loved him for his self-improvement ideologies. He's actually the guy who brought me into this like self-improvement journey. I really liked his last book, 12 Rules for Life. That is probably like one of my top 5 ever book. So I had like high expectations for this one when it came out, and I'll have to say it did not really deliver for me. Now, firstly, maybe because like I have read a lot more since I last read his work. I think I read 12 Rules of Life when I was around 16, 17, and now I've just turned 21. Like, so a lot of the stuff he preaches about, firstly, is a bit repetitive from what he talked about in 12 Rules for Life, and second of all, I just don't find too interesting. If you've read his work or listened to his like lectures or whatever before, you know the way he speaks is really elegant, but also he also uses a lot of big words. And what's worse is that I actually read this on an audiobook, so like a lot of times I'm not even like 100% focusing, and that's the thing for audiobook. If you're not like 100% focusing, and if the topic is like a very dense one, then a lot of the times it means that you lost track of where you are, and as a result not being able to absorb what they're talking about. Now, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm not smart enough, maybe I'm like constantly zoning out, but I don't think this was half as good as 12 Rules for Life, so I'll say a C tier. Sad. Next one, Steve Jobs biography. Oof, this is a big book, like this big. Like, I'm not even joking, like I think 2,000 pages long. I haven't actually finished it, but I'm like more than 70% done, so sorry if you heard the car outside, it's a bit noisy. Anyway, I haven't finished it yet, but this is a dense read. Content wise, like the content is not hard, it's literally just talking about like how he became who he is, like his childhood, everything was really detailed. There was a lot of like funny bits and it's really interesting if you're like a tech guy, right? So the book talks a lot about like his India retreat, and like how he has his weird diets, like apples only, and how he doesn't shower. Those were like, to me, the highlights of the book actually, because a lot of the tech stuff you kind of just expect them to be in the book, like how he got kicked out from Apple, how he like grew Pixar, how the Mac came by, like those you expect, but like his weird habits, those are quite interesting. Now I know that's like a very very bad review or bad impression for a book that's like 1,000+ pages long, but it's what it is. Like if you don't like it, then you can like whichever way, like you can exit the video right now. But yeah, if you like my review so far, give me a thumbs up, and I won't let you know which tier I put it in until you like my video. Yeah, liked it yet? Okay, I'll say it's a B tier book. There you go. Okay, next one, So Good They Can't Ignore You, by Cal Newport. I think he's a academic. I believe he teaches computer science in U of Penn. But basically he writes a lot of other books as well. His most famous work is Deep Work, which I didn't read last year. I read it this year. And this book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, basically talks about like how to like find a job or career that satisfies you, and how to like sort of increase your value in that career. This is a very practical read, and he backs it up with a lot of like interviews and a lot of like research paper. Again, I really like his approach, because he debunks the idea of sort of like you have to find your passion, and instead replaces it with another theory, which basically says that to find meaningful work, you have to be good at it, and then you'll find meaning and fulfillment in your work. Sort of along those lines. Like, don't quote me on this, but the book was really good, and I'll probably say this in A tier. Yep. Next one, Storyworthy. Okay, Storyworthy is by Matthew Dix. I think he's like a very famous storyteller, won like multiple storytelling competitions. Now, this book I got recommended by a friend. She said it was really good. I read it. I liked the book the most for its narration. He actually told a few like very good stories, which I thought was the highlight of the book. A lot of them was like quite touching as well. So this is probably like a good bedtime read, I would say, and it teaches you how to like tell better stories as well. I like it. B tier. Okay, two left. The Ride of a Lifetime by Robert Iger. So Robert Iger, if you don't know him, I didn't know him certainly before reading this book. He's the former CEO of Disney. He wrote this book like after his retirement, I think. And this was my first ever audiobook back then, last year. And I finished it within 2-3 days, so you know how good it is. Again, this is surprisingly not too like businessy, practical. I'll say this is more of like a good bedtime read as well, because it's more like listening to a story of how he went from like, I think he worked in ABC News, how he worked in ABC News and how he switched to a different department, and then slowly how he became the CEO of Disney. More interestingly, he talked a lot about how famous Disney deals happened. For example, how he came to bought Lucasfilms, which is like the owner of Star Wars, and how he came to acquire Marvel as well. And I found those to be quite interesting. I don't know about you, but if you like that kind of stuff, then this is probably a good book for you. But personally, I think this is an A tier. Okay, one last book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is an Austrian psychologist. Is he a psychologist?
6.5 hours later.
1 second. I actually don't know. Anyway, in this book, he writes about his experience during World War II in a concentration camp. I'm not sure if it's Auschwitz, but it could have been. This is a very heavy read because he wrote in detail a lot about like how his mental state was changing in the concentration camp, how he saw like people change in the camp, and he sort of like applied this psychological, scientific approach into interpreting the scenario. He also talked a lot about like searching for his meaning to life, like finding a way to not die, how to keep your will to survive in such a bad situation, when every day you're being dehumanized, when every day you're like closer to death. Again, it really made me more grateful about where I am today. Very heavy read, but very good. I'll say it's A tier. Okay, well, I did not expect to end in such a dark mood, but here it is. This is the tier list for all 15 books that I've read in 2021. Well, as you can see, this is actually a pretty decent result. So I read more S and A tier books than B, C, D combined actually. So this is, I'm quite satisfied actually. I did not know that. A lot of very good books on there, and if you're interested in like any of them, feel free to like comment down below, ask any questions. Yeah, if you like the video, please like it, click the like button if you haven't done so. I don't know why you haven't. And if you like my videos, feel free to subscribe. I'll be posting a lot more this year, hopefully. And you can also watch my old videos to like, kind of like get a sense of what I'll be posting. But honestly, I don't even know, man. I'm just sort of like posting whatever I learned along the way in my life. If that sounds right to you, then subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, bye.